the morning session. For those of you who are just joining, my name is Mitch Olson from CBRE, co-chair along with Scott Beethan from McKee Appraisal. I want to do a big shout out to Scott again for all his hard work this year. Big shout out to Rob Bodkin as well for organizing the two speakers coming up in this session here. So thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. Two quick housekeeping items. Please mute yourself. I think everybody is right now. It looks like everybody is. Secondly, we'd advised for questions, the Q&A is going to be at the end. So questions, you click the chat button on the very bottom, and please send those directly to Deanne, not to everybody, just so we don't distract the speakers as we're going. So just a quick recap on this morning session. So start off with Lori Mason Curran. She was discussing, Vulcan's green building development, just the overall positive impact it's had on the environment. She was talking about the orca population, the salmon population, all that stuff, as well as, the commercial real estate market and public space and where we're going in the future. So it's really enlightening to see that Seattle and Vulcan are kind of leading the charge on green building. After that was Matt Behrens from Seabury Hotels. To discuss the challenges that hospitality is facing during this pandemic. I mean, they're hit really, really hard. And Matt was saying that they've instructed some of their owners to actually completely shut down as a cost savings measure because the operating costs were too high to be profitable or even net. So just kind of an interesting move. But at the end of it, he said Seattle's still a great market moving forward. We have a lot of top tier tech talent here, and a lot of new development with NHL coming in. So things are bright on the horizon, but it'll take a while to get out. Lance Sasser, from Capital Pacific down in Portland. He discussed retail markets in the Northwest, the impacts of what some of the governmental shutdowns did due to COVID. Mentioned, a couple areas like Anchorage that have actually opened up. We've seen a lot of improvement in this sector, but there's still a long way to go for overall improvement. Core assets are still doing pretty well overall. In some cases, cap rates have actually gone down. So, again, like hotels, we still have a little ways to go, but there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And then Alex Muir from Lean Associates, really enjoyed his outlook and his input on this and what the future is for Seattle office space. There's a lot of moving parts here. Will companies decrease, the demand for office users because they want people to work from home, or are companies going to need more space to allow more, distance between people? So he doesn't know what that balance is going to be, but I thought that was an interesting point. The Bellevue market looks like it's going to be probably more secure going forward as opposed to Seattle, which you mentioned the city council mandates in terms of, the head tax and, the people want to stay here or go across the water. So again, like what he said with Matt, top tier tech talent. So overall, we should be good in the long term, but there's some challenges right now with COVID. So overall, morning session went really well, and I know this session is going to be great as well. So with that, I'll kick it over to Scott Beethan to introduce our first speaker. So Scott, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Mitch. And also, Rob, thanks so much for Rob Bodkin for organizing all of the residential. I get the opportunity and privilege to introduce Peter. And I have to say, if you know or know of Peter, what you know is that anything and everything to do with legal issues around appraisal, he is an expert. He is an expert in appraisal management, appraisal liability. He's an expert in disciplinary issues, in employment matters. He advises management companies, large firms, individual appraisers. He's had his own law firm doing this practice from 2005 through 2019, as well as he's been the general counsel for the LIA, who's one of our sponsors. Thank you very much. I think that was through the end of 2019 as well, but 2006, 2019. And he's the author of the Risk Management for Real Estate Appraisers and Appraisal Firms, published by the Appraisal Institute. So anything and everything related to legal issues around, contracts, practice, and I'm sure I'm not even giving it full due, and Peter will be able to do a much better job in describing all of the facets that he can, that he's an expert in. But high caliber. He's spoken in front of the Appraisal Foundation, the Appraisal Institute at national levels. He is the go-to legal authority in appraisal. And so it's a small group, but we're very fortunate. I think it's going to be an intimate group, and I'm really grateful to have Peter here because he's a great guy too, and he's got some roots up here in the Northwest. He's been up and back a lot of times. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
All right, Scott. I think that was the nicest introduction I've ever had.
You can pay me later.
All right. Well, that was really, really nice. And I do have some roots, not family roots, up in the Northwest. It's I've been such an avid boater for all my adult life that's what really drew me to the state of Washington. And so I was always up in the San Juans and up in British Columbia as well. So that's what really got me started on the Northwest. Maybe it all goes back to when I was in the 6th grade and I went to a camp called Canoe Island Camp off of San Juan Island. Institut du Français, actually. You learn to speak French there. That's all I learned to say. So maybe that's when it started, but I love it. Now I hope everyone can see my screen. So here's the thing, here's how deep my connection to Washington is. I'm a lawyer down here in Santa Barbara, California, but I'm actually admitted to the Washington State Bar. So that is, that's a further tie that I have to the Northwest. So Josh, I can see your face. You can see the screen. Just give me a okay. All right, good, thanks. So so I'm going to be talking about some risk and liability issues in these uncertain times. And as Scott said, I was formerly the general counsel of LIA Administrators and Insurance Services, and they are the Appraisal Institute's endorsed E&O program for appraisers. So that's what they do. Where am I going this afternoon until about 2:45? I'm going to be, first I'm going to deal with a septic system problem issue on Camano Island. And then it'll just bring out some issues worth talking about with respect to risk and liability. And then I'll ponder some few specific issues concerning coronavirus and liability. And then at the end, I'm going to touch on really the hardest subject that I probably had to deal with legally, and that is the new issues that are being so talked about concerning discrimination. So, and I'm going to touch on that at the end. And it's such a difficult subject to begin addressing, though, so it's quite challenging, as we might see. So how are lawsuit claims right now against appraisers? I'll tell you, they're very infrequent right now, and they've been appraisers just have not been getting sued very frequently for the last 6 to 8 years or so. And that's because of the continuously rising rising real estate prices and then very low mortgage defaults. So that means that you get very, very few claims about appraisals for lending purposes. You still get the other kinds of claims, like if an appraiser handles a divorce assignment or something and one of the spouses is not happy with the result there, we might see a claim arise out of that. But in general, we're not seeing many of the lending type appraisal claims, either commercial or residential. But you really have to watch for complacency because if we're at a peak of a market, if we're approaching a peak in a market, it's that you have to watch for complacency when you're in this great, on the residential side, when you're in this great booming residential market. And then, so if something happens to that great residential market and prices start to deteriorate and mortgage defaults increase, which they have increased, they're just mostly in forbearance right now, that's when you start to see claims. And the claims tend to be about all the appraisals that are done in the very best times, just in the run up to the peak or just after the peak. And then on the commercial side, of course, we see very, very different issues, and there are already pricing issues with commercial real estate. So I have started to see a few claims against commercial appraisers, few more claims than you'd usually see against commercial appraisers. And so I'm starting to see that uptick there. And the claims they're not specifically because of COVID. That's what I want to get clear today. They are because of the economic conditions, whatever's happening to that borrower or to that property. It's not that people are suing because of COVID. So let's look at this one case. It's a residential case. I call it 3 lessons in one case. The case is called Amini versus Bank of America Home Loans and Bank of America's former appraisal firm, AMC LandSafe Appraisal Services. And this decision, the part that I'm talking about, was decided in 2012. The case was actually filed in 2011. And so here's the story. Of course, this concerns Camano Island, which I'm sure you all know where it is, but north of Seattle there. And oh, just a little tidbit, I was a big boater. I'm not a big boater anymore. I'm a small inflatable boater now because all I own is a dinghy, because my larger boat caught on fire over about here and burned and sank in the Strait of Juan de Fuca in 600 feet of water. And that was the last I ever saw of it. So anyway, so I'm not such a boater anymore. But here's the story. In March of 2005, the plaintiff, Mr. Amini, obtained a mortgage loan from Bank of America to purchase a property located at 97 Utsalady, I don't know how to say that, road on Camano Island. A staff appraiser, so an employee appraiser of LandSafe Appraisal, performed the appraisal of that property. And so here's a picture of the property up there that I took off of Google Maps today. So you can see it's kind of a waterfront on the bay up there. It's this one-story kind of flattish, I think it was 600 square feet right here. So he got that loan, bought the property. He paid somewhere around $525,000 for it, I think. More than 3 years later, in July of 2008, Mr. Amini was having problems with the property's waste system, the septic tank or whatever it was there. And he hired a contractor to investigate the issue. The contractor determined that, well, like, I can't pump you out. I can't just fix the problem. You don't have a working septic system. And in fact, it's not been operable since 2005, before you bought the property. So this was, 2008. So he hadn't had a functioning septic system on this property on the bay, and I can see how that would be hard. I mean, when you've got ground like that and you're right on the bay and the water table's high and the earth's a bit soggy, I can see the challenges with a septic system there. So because of it, the problem had been going on so long, apparently, and being on that bayfront there, the failure of that system had caused some serious damage to the home's foundation as well. So he didn't just have a septic problem, he had a foundation problem. Well, the county health department up there prohibited any further occupancy of the home at that point until he could get an approved and functional septic system up and running and also repaired his foundation. Well, those repair costs were estimated in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so Mr. Amini determined that basically the property was worthless. And throughout this time, he's talking with Bank of America and saying, hey, here's what's going on with my property. I don't know that I'm going to be paying back your loan. But so the plaintiff determined the property was worthless, and he stopped making payments on his loan. Of course, this is 2008 when he discovers this problem. Maybe something happened with property prices during that time. We were headed into the property deflation. I don't know what Mr. Amini's financial circumstances were, but maybe he was having a tough time. So, that contributed probably to his decision not to make the payments on his loan. Well, Mr. Amini then sued the Bank of America and LandSafe. So just think of LandSafe. It could be a small appraisal firm. It could be a mom and pop appraisal firm, or it could be the big one that it was. He sued the bank and LandSafe for negligent misrepresentation and other claims. And what he claimed was that the LandSafe's appraiser, I'm making the story a little bit simpler than it was, because there were actually, I think, a total of 3 appraisals over a couple of years and more than one appraiser. But he alleged that the firm's appraiser reported in one of those appraisals that the property was served by a working septic system, because that's just a checkbox on the 1004 appraisal form. And he alleged that the appraiser failed to identify and report any deficiency with the system. The borrower filed that lawsuit in 2011. That was about 6 years after the original appraisal report. Well, LandSafe, the appraisal firm, moved to dismiss the case based on Washington's 3-year statute of limitations. And so you would think 6 years after the appraisal, don't we have a statute of limitations defense? The statute of limitations period is 3 years in the state of Washington. Well, the court, then this was actually a federal court, hearing that motion pointed out that, well, Washington state, like most other states, including California and Oregon, follows something called the discovery rule. And that means that that statute of limitations period doesn't start running. So that 3-year period doesn't start running until when Mr. Amini discovered, or exercising due diligence, should have discovered the alleged misrepresentation or the mistake, the error in the appraisal report. And as we know, he didn't find out about that error apparently until what I think was June or July of 2008. So the court ruled that the statute of limitations didn't begin until June 2008, because that's when Mr. Amini had first had the reason to suspect that there was a problem with that appraisal. And that date, that discovery date of the problem, was within 3 years of when Mr. Amini filed his lawsuit. So the motion to dismiss this case about the 6-year-old appraisal was denied, and the case advanced towards trial. So here's the 3 lessons. I promised 3 lessons. I'd suggest that you should keep those work files around longer than that minimum USPAP record keeping time period, which is just 5 years for most assignments. If you've given testimony relating to an appraisal, then you could have a longer record keeping time period, up to 2 years from the closure of the case in which you gave testimony, but that doesn't happen too often. So it's basically a 5-year record keeping rule from when you did the appraisal. But I would suggest to you that you keep your work files around for far longer. Think about 8 or 9 years as a good, safe measure for keeping, as a practical measure for keeping those work files around. And the other lesson from the case is that Mr. Amini, who's the borrower here, whether you're a residential or commercial appraiser, whether you work at a mom and pop appraisal firm, LandSafe, or one of the giant commercial firms, borrowers and other third parties, other than your client, are the most common source of claims against you. 60 to 65% of the time, it is a borrower or some other third party besides your client who is the source of a lawsuit or even the source of a complaint to the state board, to the state of Washington. And then third, it sounds silly, but on the residential side, issues about septic systems and sewer systems are way too common in claims. It doesn't usually happen the way it happened in this claim with there's actually a problem with the septic because of the soggy ground or the dysfunction in the system. Usually it's a simple matter of the appraiser's done a 1004 appraisal form. He or she has a template form and copies it over and over. And then when it gets to the one with the septic system, it's the box there's automatically already checked as a sewer. So that's the way the report goes out. But in fact, it turns out that that property is on a septic system and then it fails. And then we see the claim, could most likely from the borrower. Sometimes you'll get a seller if they've taken not a seller, but a lender to make a claim against an appraiser who's made this mistake. If that lender has taken the property back in foreclosure or something like that. But it's most often a borrower claim, easily preventable most of the time with just a little bit of being careful about that particular box. So what happened in this particular case? I'll tell you that ultimately, I think you all know Richard Hager up in the Washington area. He's an expert appraiser, often testifies as an expert witness. He testified as an expert, or he didn't testify, he gave an opinion as an expert witness in this case on behalf of the appraisal side. And in his opinion, he expressed an opinion that an appraiser does not have a duty to actually inspect that the septic system itself functions. He said, among other things, that an appraiser is not a home inspection, or an appraiser is not a home inspector, and the report's not a home inspection, and the appraiser does not have that duty. And the court did take that. The court did accept that, and the court did rule that way. So the issue about, okay, was this actually a mistake that the appraiser LandSafe could be sued over? LandSafe did win that in the very end, but because of the overall case dynamics, this still was a big win for Mr. Amini, the plaintiff. He had lost technically the negligence claim, but Bank of America and LandSafe, was Bank of America's loan, they settled this case by agreeing to forgive the entire balance of his $504,000 mortgage loan. So that was a very expensive septic system issue. I suppose that Bank of America just didn't want to take the property back, and there were some other claims going on in the litigation, and so turned out to be a $500,000 problem. And then so I looked up the property the other day, or this week as I was preparing this, and it appeared to me that Mr. Amini still owns that property. So I'm thinking he's got that septic system functioning now, and basically he got a free house out of this particular problem here. So so I would say he was the winner at the end of the day. But that case was also mainly about statute of limitations and this discovery rule that you have up in Washington, and we follow a similar rule here in California. Well, the state in between us, Oregon, like several other states, has actually passed some protective law specifically for appraisers. The latest incarnation of the law came about in 2019. What they did is shift the statute of limitations from 6 to 5 years. But there's two aspects of the law. In Oregon, you can't have a complaint to the Oregon ACLB more than 5 years after the real estate appraisal activity that the complaint's about. So at least if you're in Oregon, you can't get a state board complaint about an appraisal that's older than 5 years, or it's either 5 years or the record keeping time period. So, but basically 5 years. So that's good, because I have seen some really old complaints to state boards about appraisals. They might be 10 or 11 years old sometimes. And it gets a little bit absurd to talk about an appraiser's competence or ability to comply with USPAP or not when it's a 10-year-old appraisal, because you need to be looking at what they're doing now. It needs to be a little fresher when you're talking about should they have license discipline or not. That's my opinion on that. But then as far as legal claims in Oregon, Mr. Amini's legal claim, if it had been filed in Oregon, would have been dismissed under this new statute of limitations, because the statute of limitations now in Oregon is specific for real estate appraisers. And it says that you have to file a lawsuit against an appraiser before the earlier of 2 years after the person who wants to sue makes that discovery that the appraiser's made a mistake, or a maximum of 5 years after the date in which the appraisal activity or appraisal review on which the action is based was completed. So it's basically, you can't be sued over something more than a 5-year-old appraisal report. And there are a number of other states that have passed laws like that recently. And I know there was an effort in Washington to do the same, but I'm just suspecting that your legislature is like ours in California and a lot more protective of basically plaintiffs' lawyers who want to sue parties. So that's the case here in California. We would never get a law like Oregon's passed down here. So other states that have now specific protections are Kentucky, Louisiana, and these other states. They have specific appraiser protections. If you want to see the law in all 50 states, I've got a chart on my website, valuationlegal.com, limitations period. But what's really wrong with that case? The thing that's really wrong with it is it's a borrower suing an appraiser or an appraisal firm. So, and that borrower was not the appraiser's intended user. So I'm going to explore that after we have this drawing for a book. Oh, so it's my book. It's Risk Management for Real Estate Appraisers. Now, if you should win this book, I don't want you to be nervous that, you know, this book, Risk Management for Appraisers, shows up and your spouse sees it. So I'm going to send it to you in a plain brown envelope, okay? So don't worry about anyone else in your household thinking that you actually bought this book. So it'll you know, arrive in a nondescript manner. So Deanne, are you still out there?
I am.
Okay,
So,
can you
Peter,
figure out how to do a drawing?
yeah, I did. Pick a number between 1 and 30.
Okay, I'm going to go with 26.
26. 30, 28. Tom Stowe.
All right, congratulations, Tom. So, Deanne, if you give me Tom's address, that book's going to go out to him this weekend by priority mail. You know, plain brown envelope.
Great. I'll get
All
that
right.
to you.
Yep, good. Okay, so, all right, what are the most common things that appraisers actually get sued over? I'm just going to run through these real quick. These are things that I studied when I had to write the book. So I went through 8,200 claims. Most common, and these are claims about mortgage lending appraisals. This is actually true whether it's residential or appraisal work. So I studied the 8,200 claims in LIA's claims directory. And of course, appraisers, number one, get sued over value, that the value was too high or too low. It could, if it's a borrower, it might be too high or too low. If it's a lender, they're only ever going to say that the value was too high and we made a loan that we shouldn't have, and we didn't recover anything when we foreclosed. That's what a lender's going to say. Second most common error, though, and more preventable than like an issue about value, is measurement. Appraisers are always, not always, but in cases, a lot of the time, making errors in measuring homes or commercial buildings. And that is the actual outright error that I can most often point to, that an appraiser makes a mistake and gets sued over, or gets a complaint to the state over. And then the third most common category are all these physical condition characteristics items. So appraisers getting blamed, either rightly or wrongly, for things like leaky roofs, mold, foundation settlement. Of course, there's lots, I'm saying this is what they get sued over. There's lots of defenses to these things. I already told you that Mr. Amini actually lost his negligence claim. There were other claims in the case, but he lost the negligence claim basically because the court accepted the idea that it wasn't the appraiser's job to determine if that septic system was functioning properly. Just so, you know, just because there is a problem doesn't mean that the appraiser has liability, but these are things that appraisers get sued over. If it's obvious, if it's observable, then the appraiser may have liability. If it's something that you wouldn't ordinarily be expected to find, then I would not expect you to have liability. So, wait, but Mr. Amini, can he really sue the appraiser? Because he was not an intended user of that report, and so it's not a clear line here. An appraiser has potential liability to those parties that they know or reasonably expect will use or rely on their work. So this makes your intended use and user language in every report vitally important, because if you say that someone is an intended user of yours in an appraisal report, you're saying that basically you owe a legal duty to that person. And you're saying that that person could bring a legal claim against you. So that's how important intended user and use language is in reports. And the more narrowly you write it, the better off you'll be. So if you're doing regular 1004 appraisal reports, there are some problems with that report form. Certification number 23 contains some very bad language. So I would suggest you put in a specific plain English advisory about, hey, this appraisal, the appraiser has not identified a purchaser or a borrower or a seller as an intended user of this report. So this is the key language that I like to see in residential reports when I'm defending them. You can put it in your own words. If you're doing something like divorce work, again, I want you to have a good, precise, and narrow description of your intended use and the user. So your user is going to be one of the spouses or perhaps the spouse's attorney, but the intended use is going to be very specific and say that it's for The use of the appraisal report is for contesting the divorce proceeding, and that's it, nothing else. You're not going to have some big broad description of intended use, like the intended use of this appraisal is to provide an opinion of market value. That gives you no protection, doesn't slim down anything. So anyway, moving quickly along, I want to address corona liability issues. Are there potential liability impacts for appraisers that might stem from COVID-19? Do you need a giant disclaimer in your reports about COVID-19? My answer would be no. I don't think you need a specific giant disclaimer about COVID-19 because that's not the way I anticipate or that I'm actually seeing right now claims come about. But let's start with a little bit more of a direct kind of question here. And the question is really this question: can an appraiser, the bank, or an AMC be liable to a borrower if a borrower later claims that the appraiser made them sick or sickened them with the virus? Or the reverse, if you're an appraiser, can I sue the bank or the AMC that sent me out there in the field to inspect this house and I got sickened by the occupants of this house? First of all, have I seen claims about these things in practice? And I run multiple searches every day in multiple legal databases, and I haven't yet seen a case in which an appraiser was sued for something like this, or an AMC was sued for something like this yet. I suppose it could happen. These kinds of claims are plausible, like, okay, the claim that you made a homeowner sick, it's a plausible claim legally. And in other circumstances, yes, there have been claims like this made against individuals who knowingly or recklessly spread the virus. And the reason is because everyone has a duty to avoid this kind of negligence, whether you're an appraiser or any other kind of professional or an ordinary person. You have a basic standard of care that when you violate it, yes, you can be sued. But how do you avoid that kind of claim? By following the standard of care. So if you're appraising people's homes and you're inside people's homes, that means if the current recommendation in Washington or by the CDC is to wear a mask, it means wearing a mask, and socially distancing, and of course being responsible about not being out there in the presence of other people inspecting their homes if you know or really suspect you may be sick. Now, I've not seen appraisers be sued over this. I've seen other groups of people sued over this. It's been that last part, when they went out and did something suspecting or knowing that they may be sick. That's when the claim came about. So now, if there were a first appraiser claim against an appraiser, this would be the kind of claim scenario I would say. I found this when looking for information to talk about today. So this is from August. An apparent borrower named Marina wrote in onto an appraiser group's website, and she wrote in, this is a borrower. She says, I'm in the process of refinancing, and the appraiser had to inspect the inside of the property. He showed up without wearing a mask. And when I asked if he would wear one, he said he would rather not. Even when I told him I had disposable ones available to him. He made my 1-year-old son, sister, and mother all wait outside the home since we weren't comfortable with him being inside the home. I'm not comfortable with the idea of catching the virus from him. Very annoyed and frustrated. So, okay, if this gentleman appraiser actually was sick, and if this homeowner was sickened by that and could prove that factually, this is the kind of circumstance where I would expect a claim of that kind. But as I said, I've not yet seen it. I'll stick over our disclosure form that the realtors use here in California. Because what's the more likely legal risk? The more likely legal risk comes from the fallout of COVID-19. What's going to be the end result of high unemployment and increased mortgage defaults? Now, there's going to be a time where mortgages on residential properties are no longer in forbearance. There's going to come a time where we see the consequences of these things. Will price declines ultimately occur on residential properties? I don't know for sure. We are seeing that, of course, on commercial properties. Maybe we'll never see that on residential properties, but we are seeing financial difficulties of borrowers. So we are seeing foreclosures. And so what happens in times like this? We already know the answer what happens. And that's from the last financial downturn, the last financial crisis. What happened was, just because of the financial circumstances, people's incomes down, because of increased mortgage defaults, that caused more claims. 3 times as many claims as we see now resulted in the years 2008, 9, and 10. That's what happens with increased foreclosures and financial problems. So what are your best ways of taking care of that? It's not a giant disclaimer about COVID-19. You could actually potentially make things worse if you have a giant disclaimer about COVID and you can't tell what the market is, or you're making some kind of assumption that COVID-19 is not affecting the market. You could make things worse in your valuation for yourself, because your job as an appraiser is to report the market and to do so intelligently, of course, and safely. The better things to focus on are using very narrow and precise intended use and user descriptions, because the claims come from borrowers. So the better job you do on those items, the harder time borrowers and other third parties will have in trying to sue the appraiser. And then of course you got to watch for those changing markets and use your good analysis to report on that. The hardest claims that we had to defend after the last financial crisis were simply those claims that just were after the peak of the prices and appraisers were using older and older comps. Those were the hardest claims to defend. It wasn't the claims at the bottom of a market, it was the claims towards the top or just afterward. Use plain English in your reports. If you've got a special scope of work now, like not a full interior inspection, you describe that in plain English in the report. Because what you write in plain English is the most powerful disclaimer that you can do in a report. It is so much more meaningful than what is pre-printed on that pre-printed boilerplate in a 1004 is not nearly as meaningful as the words that you write in plain English on it. So now let's turn to a really difficult subject, because I think we are going to see more litigation in the future relating to discrimination, alleged discrimination in appraising whether, and now it's not just residential that I'm talking about, it's also commercial. And I have seen, of course, there's been such a focus on discrimination, particularly in the court system and the justice system. But and of course, the discussion is much broader than just that. And so now we can even see that the Appraisal Foundation and the Appraisal Institute as well are coming out with plans to somehow fix or combat discrimination in the appraisal profession. And so here, this Dave Bunton writing for the Appraisal Foundation, of course, he says there's no place for discrimination in the profession. And then he talks about there's recent reporting and news outlets across the country have told stories of Black families who've received home appraisals which reflected a lower than the expected value, raising the specter of discrimination and devaluation of the Black-owned property. And of course, I think the most well-publicized story of this occurred in Jacksonville, to a home where the couple there that lived in the home, they got one appraisal where they'd left pictures out of themselves and their family, and they were a family of mixed race. And then that first value came in what they thought was low, and then I think they removed the pictures and things, and then a different appraiser came in and the value was higher. Now that's not really scientific, but the allegation was of discrimination with a low value. And so now there have been claims in the past about this, and I've started to see claims again about this. And this is more from Dave Bunton's letter for the Appraisal Foundation. He points here to, okay, First off, he says we need to raise the awareness of the reporting mechanisms available to property owners if they suspect bias or discrimination. And he's talking about complaints to state boards. I can see that, but I don't know that state appraiser boards are well equipped at this point to deal with these kinds of complaints. These kinds of complaints historically have gone more to HUD because HUD has specific enforcement abilities under the Fair Housing Act to combat discrimination. So I think that HUD is the more likely recipient or the better recipient, probably the more able recipient of these kinds of complaints. But there have been very recent examples of the subject of discrimination being raised in both licensing complaints and in litigation. And it's not just a residential appraiser issue, it is a commercial appraiser issue. Commercial appraisers are not immune from this. I know I'm talking to a mainly residential gathering today. So the alleged acts of discrimination, they are not necessarily what you would think of as intentional discrimination, where someone is intentionally discriminating, intentionally lowering a value or doing something like that. They can be unintentional. And these are difficult claims to defend. As I mentioned, they have been filed in the past. Here's what makes a claim about discrimination difficult. In a negligence claim, when the borrower is suing you, your lawyer gets a really easy argument for you. They get to argue you didn't owe a legal duty to the borrower because they weren't your intended user or something like that. That's a very easy defense to a typical negligence claim. When the allegation is discrimination, oh no, the field is wide open. This is a difficult claim to defend now. You're not going to get probably an easy out of this one. So you really have to be sensitive to these issues in both the development of your appraisal and in the reporting of it as well. And so here's an example. Here's the most recent case that I've seen, and it's commercial. And you can picture, what if you're the defendant appraiser in this situation? What if there were a news story about you doing this, allegedly doing this? I don't think that there was any intentional discrimination here, but there might have been some built-in problems just into how the appraisers were treating the assignment. So this case was filed in September of 2020. It concerns a hotel. So the hotel owner was seeking to, and the plaintiff here is not who you think they would be. The hotel owner was seeking to have cash funds that secured a credit line held by the hotel released based on appraisals of the hotel. If the hotel's mortgage LTV got down low enough, then that cash would be released and they wouldn't need it to secure the credit line anymore. Well, the hotel had actually transitioned to being used as a government contracted homeless shelter. Had been a 3-star hotel, but it was now contracted to serve homeless. Annual appraisals were performed for the purpose of evaluating that credit line. The values in those appraisals were too low to support the release of those funds. So the hotel owner filed a complaint to the state appraiser regulator and also filed later in September a lawsuit. The primary claim alleged by the hotel owner is that the appraisers discriminated in their valuation on the basis that the occupants of the hotel were primarily racial minority single mothers with children. So the appraisers had made a point in their valuation that the value of the hotel was lower because it had been used by families, by single mothers with children, and those children, the appraisers said, were likely to cause damage, physical damage to the hotel, which would require repair costs and lower the value of the hotel. Well, that might sound like that makes sense, but doing that can actually be an illegal form of discrimination. That's why I said this may be unintentional. It's not cast as unintentional in the complaint. No, the plaintiff suing here is saying these appraisers intentionally discriminated against the occupants of the hotel and is asking for punitive damages. but I think it's more likely a story of unintentional illegal discrimination according to the Fair Housing Act. I think that's what the allegation more gets at. And in fact, Advisory Opinion 16 in USPAP speaks to this issue. Because appraisers will, you know, the issue here is, well, I'll just point to, since we're running out of time, I'll point to the last sentence here in Advisory Opinion 16. And the point is, even supported conclusions in assignments, like children are going to cause physical damage to the rooms in the hotel, even supported conclusions in assignments relating to characteristics such as race, color, religion, national origin, gender, marital status, familial status, age, etc., cannot be used as a basis to support an appraisal because they are precluded by applicable law. So even though the valuation itself might make sense in some analytical way, it can still be illegal under the Fair Housing Act. So here's an example from the actual court. Now this is an example, from the court complaint. This is what the plaintiff alleges, that the appraisal firm discriminated in the terms of such appraisal on the basis of the actual or perceived race, color, national origin, gender, marital status, and alienage, because the occupants were immigrants primarily, or citizenship status of the homeless guests at the hotel, and or because the children were residing with those guests. So you would not want to be a defendant in one of these cases, certainly right now. So I expect to see more of this kind of litigation in the future. And this is where I think appraisers really need to be careful in these uncertain times. So that's all I have for you. Thanks for your patience, Josh, and letting me finish up with that last 5 minutes. And I'm gonna, Josh, I wish I could stay for yours, but I'm actually gonna talk to the NorCal chapter starting at 3 o'clock. That's the thing about Zoom. You can go from one chapter to another without getting on an airplane. So, all right, thank you all for having me.
Peter, thank you very much. That was really informative and a lot of good food for thought. Thank you for joining us and always being a friend to our chapter and our conferences.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. And that brings up Josh Wallach, and I'm not going to get anywhere near Scott's intro. Sorry in advance, Josh. But when I was asked to put this panel together, Peter and Josh were the first two names that came to my mind. And I was so fortunate that both of them said yes. And Josh is an appraiser out of Colorado, over 20 years experience, has written for our trade publications, has taught classes. He's an AQB certified USPAP instructor. He's a designated member of the Appraisal Institute with the SRA and the AIRRS. And his specialty, or one of his specialties, and how I came to know him, is he is an expert in efficiency and refining processes and helping appraisers make better use of their time, their people, their processes, so that we get a little more money in our life and a little more time in our life. And I can say with absolute certainty that I took advantage of him and I got both of those for me. So I was very excited when he said yes, that he would join us. And without anything more for me, here's Josh Wallach.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Rob. Thanks for that introduction. That's great. I'm glad to hear things are working well. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So we're here to talk about streamlining. We're not talking about sloppy work. We're not talking about ignoring our requirements, our obligations, and the standards. We're talking about doing things smarter and working our business in a smarter way so we have some consistency. And we'll take a look at some examples of that. And I call this rapid fire tips because really we're just going to be touching on a lot of different topics that you can think of, kind of mull over regarding your business. So we're not taking a look and saying, let's focus on one item and really hash it out, because this way you can get a lot more out of it. We can take a look at a variety of items. So just to tell you a little bit about me, I'm from Colorado. I'm in Western Colorado. So about almost into Utah, so far west in Colorado, about 4 hours west of Denver, all the way over the mountains. And I provide short and long-term consulting for various clients. It usually centers on valuation, could center on methods and techniques and supporting. As a matter of fact, one of my appraiser clients is a trainee, and he wants to get sort of a more well-rounded education, so to speak, or experience and methods and techniques. And so we're working along with what he's receiving from his supervisor. Education, review, investigations. Right now I do have some cases that I work on for a state where I'm actually taking a look at their complaints and performing some investigative services for them on appraiser complaints. And I do work for lending institutions for appraisers, AMCs, attorneys, accountants, regulators, and really all sorts of different clients. It's just different for me every day, the work I'm doing for various types of clients. I really enjoy that variety. Thoughts are my own. I am parts of different organizations, but my thoughts are my own. I'm not representing any group here. But let's start out by talking about assistance. And remember, if you do have questions, type them into the chat there, and we can handle those at the end too. So you're going to be thinking, okay, well, if I am thinking of adding a trainee or an assistant or an admin or an analyst, or, really we need to be thinking about, well, how many, what are they going to be doing? Because it's not just a question of adding a body, right? We're talking about, what is it I want them doing? What is it maybe I need them doing, right? So a lot of the time I talk about how what I provide to clients is I'm a puzzle piece and I fit in. And that's really that sort of broader concept of when you bring someone in to work along with you, or you grow your team and bring more people in to work with you. It's what role are they filling? What sort of puzzle piece are they for you? And so what will they be doing? Where will they be working? Are they working in the same town? Are they working in the same office? Are they across the country? And really the goals are to increase production, be more consistent, and really to grow the office overall. So we're really trying to talk about doing more in less time. Again, we are not talking about sloppy work. We're talking about consistent work. We're talking about a well-oiled machine. Who is doing what? Maximizing your time, and your goal might be to get to dinner on time for once, right? Or it might be to not work until 11 o'clock, or it might be to take Fridays off, or to semi-retire, or to, what your goals are different than other people's goals. But we really are taking a look at your workflow, your procedures in this aspect. I mean, we do take a look at methods and techniques and things like that, but that's kind of, that's not really what we're talking about here on this particular presentation. We're really talking about procedures. Who's doing what? Do we have them written? I did a very informal poll on a Facebook appraiser group a few months ago, and I said, how many offices have written procedures? And I think it was fewer than half of the respondents said that. Now, of course, that's not a scientific poll, but if you invite someone into your office to have them do work, and you grow your team in that way, you do need some place to have your procedures, have your policies somewhere, so you can have a sort of a consistent way, and you can hold people accountable. And you can really discover, well, who is doing what, when, and where, right? You might not even understand necessarily and have ever mapped it out and really understand all that you do and maybe what pieces you can give away. So we really want to look at modular procedures, right? What chunks of tasks can we break out of what goes on in the life cycle of an appraisal assignment, and really in other processes, perhaps in your office. So, we might have, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 through stage 10. Well, maybe the appraiser is only involved in 3 of those stages, but a lot of those other sort of logistical type jobs are handled by other people. And a lot of the other support jobs are handled by other people, right? So we're looking for sort of a central place, an intranet, a shared drive, somewhere where everybody on the team, whether they're across the country or across the world or sitting next to you, everybody can access those. And we have checklists so we know exactly where. So, you know, Rob was talking about his office. So let's pick on him. You know, he can go in to his system and he can look and say, okay, we've got, you know, 23 orders open, and this is where we are with all of them. And he has that sort of grasp of what's going on, right? He doesn't have to call up and have a meeting every day and say, well, where are we with this? What about this one? What about this one, right? He knows if he needs to act on them or if it's someone else's turn to take action on the file. Due dates, are we setting the due dates? Work dates. Having an assistant that keeps you in line. Sometimes people need that, right? Sometimes we're maybe not the most organized, but we can have an assistant be very organized, and they can coordinate the due dates, quote different due dates. If it won't work, we have too many due on one day already, we can't take more. And well, geez, when am I going to work on these, right? And so blocking out the 2 hours or the 3 hours or the 4 hours, however you break up your tasks, and depending on perhaps how complex the assignment is, when are you going to get it done, right? So you're not up until midnight. And so you're actually planning all of these details that need to go into it, but each touch, each step takes time, right? So it doesn't, you don't need to be doing some of these things, right? So especially when you have repetitive tasks, like maybe there are market studies and market reports that need pulled or need generated or need sort of crunched if you use some sorts of tools. Maybe on a monthly basis or a bi-monthly basis, someone's pulling that. Who's pulling the subject MLS in the county or the MLS in the county for the comps? I call a lot of these tasks or refer to them as, you know, who is pushing the buttons, right? You can train someone to push buttons, right? So for example, I live in a subdivision called Grove Creek. If someone's appraising in Grove Creek, where are they first going to start their study for comps anyway? Well, they're probably going to look in Grove Creek, right? Can someone push those buttons for the appraiser rather than the appraiser going in? Well, of course, someone can do that. And they don't necessarily have to be a trainee. You can say on every order, when you're creating this order, I need a report from you from the MLS, and I need to see the search criteria you used. I need to see all the subdivision sales in the past 24 months, and I can see you did your work correctly because the criteria is right there, okay? If there are automated tools, who's inputting that data, right? If it's a standard process, if it's a repetitive task, and different report sections and attaching exhibits and researching and finding those exhibits and attachments. So you might find yourself thinking right now, well, that only takes me, right? That only takes me a minute. Well, that only takes me 30 seconds, right? Those add up. I had a client yesterday. We actually had to postpone his meeting because he had misscheduled something, and he said, yeah, I'm so busy. I worked on 13 orders yesterday, and I didn't, you know, inspect 13 in one day, but he worked on them. And I said, as we were looking through his procedures and his process, I said, wow, multiply everything we're talking about by 13, right? And someone else could be doing these types of things. So ask yourself, who's making the coffee? Maybe literally, perhaps figuratively. Who's checking emails though, literally? Who's responsible for file management, for training, for scheduling, excuse me. So really you want to take a look for what can I let go of, and then train and delegate to it. So we're focusing on the who, what, when, and where. Who is doing what, when, and where are they doing it from? Okay. So we really want to focus on letting go. I'm not suggesting that you let go of everything, right? I enjoy watering my plants. As a matter of fact, it's sitting next to me because I watered it today. Friday is my plant watering day, okay? As silly as that sounds, I enjoy watering my plant. I'm not going to ask someone else to water my plants. You know, but you might enjoy wasting a little time of walking for half an hour over lunch hour. That's not wasting time. It's clearing your head, right? So you may have to value some things, but things that you can let go of, let go of them. Let go of them, okay? Because the person you're paying to do the things are hopefully making less money than you're making yourself. So you are generally going to be a more valuable participant in the whole scheme of how your office is managed. So I really ask people, and don't type it in the chat. We're not looking to fix fees or anything like this. But how much is your minute worth? You know, and if you think of it in hours, think of it in hours. If you think of it in days, think of it in days. But by doing a lot of these tasks that someone else can do, you're really losing over and over. So if you have someone who can do some of the tasks we looked at, and we'll take a look at a further breakdown further on, but if you have someone to do that for half the price, half that rate, or a third of the rate of what you're making, then you can have that, what I like to think of as that sort of overlapping actions, right? You are now providing the last analysis, you are doing the final reconciliations, writing up the report, you're proofreading it, you're checking it. Meanwhile, there's 3 other assignments getting scheduled and being pulled together. And you've got a trainee over here doing some research and some support for other assignments that are being worked on that need some work in there that you're going to then look at together. So you've got 3 things going on all at the same time, and you're coming out ahead. So that's really the concept that we're talking about with a trainee. Sometimes people look at it and they say, you know what, I can't imagine it. But there's a lot of ways that trainees can fit in, okay? Let's get off of the trainee and the assistant track right now. And let's just take a look at some other ideas that we can be more efficient in the work we do. Okay, and this is really getting to some, especially this first section here, smart appraising. Okay, let's say we analyze the influence of a busy road, or of the GLA adjustment rate, or quality, or condition, or site size, or room counts, or garage, and on and on and on, right? We can think of all sorts of different factors that we study. Maybe it has to do with certain zoning, and you've researched certain zoning and what's allowed and what's not, and you have, so we want to make sure we're saving our work. So Peter talked about work files, right? We can have in concept a master work file, right? So when I have studied and said, you know, okay, busy road is influencing it in this way. It's an amount, it's a percentage, it's, you know, whatever the factor is, I'm going to save that because that's something I might use down the line. So I'm not just saying, well, you know, my experience tells me, but I can't quite remember what that experience is. And then, oops, that's the one that gets the state complaint. And they come back to you and they say, well, where's your evidence for that busy road, Tom or Justin or Lisa? And you say, well, I know I've studied it. It's in my experience, right? Well, no, what we can do is just as we save our research to our individual file, work file, we can also just have what we might consider a master work file, right? We're naming PDFs, we're scanning them, we're naming them and organizing them in such a way that we can look up for certain areas of town, or we can look up certain characteristics and things like that. So I can say, you know what, 2 months ago, I just worked on this island and I did a GLA study. Let me go back to that. And I can take a look at maybe some adjustment rate support, and I'm not reinventing the wheel. As a matter of fact, if you have a trainee or an analyst or some other type of assistant, you can have them pull and say, okay, all the support we have for that island is this, and they can pull it into an electronic folder, and they can say, I retrieved these, I copied these over for you. This is all prepared for you. You can sort through it and figure out which of these bits and pieces of research are useful, and figure out what else you need to do more research on, right? So, because we're not talking about skipping steps, we're talking about not reinventing and redoing the steps, right? So having that sort of central repository, I call it master work file. You can call it whatever you like. Something that's retrievable to support the work you're doing. Okay, taking a look at templates. If you have it, let's say a text addenda template, don't we all love the forms, right? The forms are really pretty much inadequate for many items that we need to discuss and narrate in our reports. And so we rely on text templates, right? But we want a consistent template that works for others, so it's efficient for all of the people in our workflow to understand what parts are they touching and what parts are they keeping hands off, and that's going to be handled later, right? And you have a consistent report style, so you can read through it, your assistants can read through it, your trainees can read through it. If you have a QC person, they can read through it. Everybody knows how it's going to be laid out, and it's also really great for your clients because it's a consistent process. All right, and you can go additive or reductive, and I talk to clients about that. Different folks have different preferences. You can either start off with almost a blank slate, but maybe some headings, and you just sort of insert language that you think is appropriate, or you can start off with this really long, you know, maybe 20-page, maybe I'm exaggerating, template, and you just delete away what doesn't belong. So you just wash it away. No, it doesn't have septic. I don't need any discussion about septic. I don't need that heading even. I'm not going to discuss it. Okay, the highest and best use was really simple. I already took care of it. I don't need this larger sort of formatting or style for my discussing the highest and best use in this particular case. So then you have sort of a reductive approach. You're sort of deleting off. But having something that works so your trainees can deliver to you, or your assistants can deliver to you reports that you can work in, right? And it's not something arranged, yet again, differently, and I don't know where anything else is. Okay, so we do want to have a standard way of collecting and saving our engagement letters, contracts, the MLS, the realists, the assessor links, things like that. And we also want instructions for all of our staff to understand how to use spreadsheets, how to use the other tools, how to use our tasks lists, and having appointments, noting and labeling them in a very consistent way so we know exactly what we're doing on what day, what types of status updates, the various attachments we may need, and the assignment stages. So if we're about a third of the way through an assignment, we need to be able to see a snapshot of that in whatever tools we're using. So, you know, if Adam's assistant checks off 6 stages and there's 4 more, you're going to know, okay, this is where we are, and this is the person who needs to take action on it right now. It's, you know, it's Bill's job, it's Robert's job, it's Joe's job. They need to get on it, right? And you know, okay, at this point, it's not my job to do. I can't act on it yet. They haven't done their part. So having those tasks lists. And also even an engagement letter for private work, having that standard to where you're not filling it out. You might be having the conversation, you might be making some notes, but someone else is preparing it, getting it sent out, getting the signatures, and getting it back to you, okay? So you're not having to do some of those other simpler tasks because you're the analyst, right? You're the highest value in the office in terms of delivering the product. You're that highest value person there. And that's not to say, you know, we're not valuing people, but in terms of our earning power, that's how we have to take a look at it. Okay, so we talk about trainees and assistants, assistants who may not be appraisers, right? They may be admin assistants. We've talked about, now we're talking about technology. Okay, so we want to take a look at tools. Okay, I was talking with someone yesterday at a software company. They said, well, you know, a lot of appraisers like to use technology. They like to use Excel, okay, but they don't necessarily, you know, have everything they need to really get it into their reports, or they don't know how to use Excel to their best ability. They don't really know what to do. And so, you know, taking a look at the tools that are out there so that you're not saying, you know what, I need to spend 20 to 25 minutes on every assignment just even figuring out what's going on in this market, because I'm having to move these columns over here, and then I'm having to go into the MLS system and pull up this report, and I've got to look over here, and I've got to, you know, do you have a tool that can help you do a lot of this at once? And there's a lot of those tools out there on the market that can help you crunch the data, right? We're talking about, really, that's what tools are doing. The tools aren't thinking for you, right? Hopefully not. Hopefully the tools aren't thinking for you. What they're doing is they're crunching the data. They're organizing it. They're putting it into columns. They're putting it in order. It's charting and graphing. So it benefits you. So you can quickly take a look at snapshots. You can look into more detail at certain aspects that you need to, but you can get these big, high-level understandings immediately. And some of them might be useful for putting into the report for your client to also understand, okay? Don't include many, many pages. They're not going to look at that, but some relevant charts and graphs are pretty useful for your client to understand some things that you're talking about, whether it's market analysis, whether it's adjustment support, and so on. Okay, technology, on that same line of thinking with technology, we're saving time, increasing efficiency, and we could also say consistency, and we're staying organized. So we're tracking orders. You know, I don't need to, you know, I'm not sure I can see hands because many people have their video off, but, you know, think to yourself, do I have a system, especially if I have another person I coordinate with, for tracking the orders? Or is it just, you know, is it all these file folders, right? Is it all these file folders and I just sort of shuffle them? Or is there that snapshot ability to see what's going on with my orders? Scheduling, you know, taking a look at using apps if you have that ability. If your MLS has the ability to use, you know, the showing office or showing desk or whatever they call their certain app. So of course you're not going to be doing it. You're going to have someone else schedule it. I always encourage that. Some folks don't like doing that. They don't subscribe to that. They do it themselves. That's fine, because you're not going to let go of every single thing. But are you sharing that schedule into whatever app you're using or your staff is using so that they can schedule for you and they know your preferences? Now, I know this person, Vince, does not like morning appointments. Okay, so don't schedule something until after 1 for him. That's what he likes. Now, you know, maybe there's exceptions, right? But he's going to let his folks know his preferences for it, and they're going to see all of those items. They're going to see the due dates, so they know he's got 6 due. Don't schedule him out of the office that day, right? And don't schedule any more due on that day, right? Same with payments and team communication. When you're done and you're syncing your sketch and your data and your photos up to the cloud because you're done in the field, letting them know through an app saying, hey, I'm done. Paul, I need you to pull all the sales in that area that meet this criteria, because it turns out none of the comps I brought with me are going to be good. So I need you to have this on my desk when I get back. I want to see the criteria that you used so I can confirm it, and I want to see all that results page. Okay, so having that team communication. So we're overlapping. What are we overlapping there? We're overlapping drive time of you with office work that's happening behind the scenes. So you can actually drive without thinking, I've got to press this gas pedal down really hard because I have so much more work back at the office, right? You can rest assured there's something happening actually at the office. So taking a look at using as few technology platforms as possible. Okay, if you can do it in your existing technology, do it, right? So you're not going here for this piece, here for this piece, here for this piece, right? So if you can get it done in a limited number of technology platforms, try for that. All right, so let's just take a quick look. We've got cloud storage, great way. My assistant works in or lives in Belize. She's lucky enough to be in Belize, but she's in the same time zone, so it works really wonderfully. But we use Dropbox, we use Teams, we use Zoho, we use, we chat all the time. She's not working today, so I haven't chatted with her, but you know, it's just immediate. Hey, did you do this? Okay, I've got my task. I know what status that task is in. I know exactly if she's responsible for the next action or I'm responsible for the next action. And we have that process down to a science for teamwork. So we can share data, we can communicate, and then I encourage people, your mobile inspection software, use it to the 99th percentile of use. Okay, don't leave features unused. Even labeling photos, that seems really simple, but it means you have to do that when you get back to the office. Well, Josh, it only takes me 40 seconds. I know. And that's why you want to do it in the field with a quick list instead of at your desk later on, right? Get a lot of the sentences out of the way, get some of the comments about what you saw out of the way. It's going to be harder to remember later. You're going to be inefficient later, and you're going to have to be looking at other notes and other photos. It's just not going to work as smoothly. You're going to waste time. Okay, so use those apps. The apps are there to be, make you more efficient. Okay, so policies. So people say to me, well, I'm afraid an assistant is going to just accept any orders that come in my email. All right, that's a legitimate concern. That's why you would train them and say, don't accept every order that just simply comes in my email. Right there, you've just trained them. And maybe you have a selective list. And if there's a new client that they don't see on this list, they go to you. And you say, okay, well, what's the fee they're off? Or, oh my goodness, no, we're not working for them. I've heard about them. We're not working for them, right? You might just tell them no, and now we have a do not use list. And if you see them come across, you just delete it. I don't want to see them, right? So you may have some policies in place on how they act. It is hard to let go of quoting on assignments and accepting orders. Okay, it's really hard to let go of that. But you can train someone to go through the process that you go through in your thinking. Okay, sometimes it may not be, a very long written policy or process. It might just be sort of a list of here's some considerations that we're going to make, and they'll get to know what you're talking about, right? But that can be trained for. Okay, let's take a look at the appraisal reports. Who is typing what? So I encourage people to use assistants for data entry. Some people use data entry companies with very specific instructions. This is how I want it. I don't want it different. This is how I want it, right? So very clear instructions on exactly what you want. Again, report templates need to be usable by all. So don't make it something that only you understand what's going on in this template. Other people need to follow the instructions and say, oh, they mean right here, I paste this. Or, I understand, it's the last page of the report that they want X to be inserted in, or something like that, right? So other types of information that can go into reports are some of the number crunching tools. Okay, if you train someone else on it, they can be putting it in there. And I encourage people, if you don't like what you see in the marketplace, matter of fact, I just had about 2 weeks ago someone call, and I was embarrassed actually, I didn't remember this person's name, but he said, no, we talked a few months ago or a year ago or something, and he said, you gave me the name of the Excel programmer that you'd used, and I had him design an Excel spreadsheet with all sorts of buttons and macros, and it organizes it and it crunches it just the way I need. It creates the charts and graphs just how I need. So I really wanted to thank you for referring me to this person. And there's thousands of those people around the world who can customize Excel just for how you want your charts and graphs and analysis to occur. Don't try to do it yourself. Okay, we're all good at the add and subtract and divide, but when it comes to all these other complicated functions and algorithms, let an Excel expert do it, right? You're the expert on appraisal. They're an expert on Excel, and go out to them. And you can go to fiverr.com. There's all sorts of ways you can find different types of people. So let's go through some procedures. These are the groups of procedures, and I'm going to go through this really fast. But what we're talking about is sort of a stage one. Okay, we have the assignment information, we have in-office data entry. So we have some just initial data entry. We're talking about maybe some information related to USPAP certifications, just the general assignment information. If we have to change intended use and users and note that in the report, different attachments that may be standard, anything additional like rent studies and the definition of market rent, things like that, that we don't want left off if that's part of the assignment. And then we have a stage, I'm going through this real fast, just for time, and it is rapid fire after all, that's what we're calling it. But keep in mind, the reason we have this blocked out is because these pieces can sort of move around a little bit. They're a little bit independent of each other in some ways. And maybe in this case, okay, we're going to do this before that, or really it's role dependent. Okay, who is doing the, like you see on your screen, preliminary research? That's the trainee in your office perhaps, right? Okay, who's doing the field work? Well, that's dependent on the assignment. Many cases it's the lead appraiser until, you know, if there's an allowance in the state and for the client that the trainee were to do it themselves. Okay, some other support. Who's sending out those verification emails? If there's nothing special to ask, maybe there's a general email that can be sent out saying, hey, I have these standard 3 questions. Can you tell me more about this transaction, right? And who is then receiving the report back if it went out to a data entry company? Who's, you know, bringing it in, taking a look, making sure things are right, and then boom, pushing it to the next step, right? So these are, I sometimes say sort of clumps of steps, and that makes it sound really awful. They're stages, okay? They're groups of steps, but we're kind of, boxing them together, okay? Now we have someone who, okay, let's take a look at additional research. Okay, this could be, and then leading into some next steps. So we're taking a look, maybe there's some COVID-19, or we might just say in general, some market specific or other specific research that needs to happen. We're pulling in all that other research, like I mentioned earlier. Here's all the research for the Southeast Grand Junction area. We have all this research. Some of this might be useful, but I know we're also going to have to, and we fill in the blank and we identify additional research we're going to need to conduct. Okay, is there someone who can be pulling the cost sheets? Is there someone that can be pulling up all of the sales in this town of vacant land? Okay, is there someone that can be calling the property management company to get rental data? Okay, you as the appraiser are in charge of overseeing, taking a look at the documentation. One of the simple illustrations is the search criteria in MLS, right? We want to make sure that what is handed to us and being done by the trainee or an analyst is the correct information that we asked for, right? Because the appraiser is in charge. So if we're given the cost sheets for average, and it was supposed to be for the very good, we're going to know it, right? It's on that sheet. We know it was done incorrectly or correctly. So this isn't about pushing responsibility off the appraiser or doing things sloppy. This is about, can I be the central hub and having people acting around me? Okay. There may be some additional site comments that need to be addressed if there's certain aspects of the site that need researched. If there's required repairs, have we typed it up correctly for FHA versus VA and so on, so people can understand what we're actually asking for there. And then finally, we're having that finish work with the final analyses and reconciliations. We do want to go through a QC process. Okay, we do want a quality control process. Sometimes that is simply printing it to PDF so it looks a little bit different to your brain, and then you actually look at it. Okay, if you're looking at it in the software, it always looks right. If you look at it slightly different, you actually may catch some errors, and that's just a little trick I've found. signature, delivery, and then we're closing it out with work file, with tracking, with accounting, and so on. So again, rapid fire tips. I hope you took something away in terms of, oh, geez, I need to think about this, right? And that's really what the issue is. Not doing everything I just said and throwing your office into disarray, but saying, this makes sense for me. This piece makes sense for me. I really need to look at this and change how I'm doing it. Okay, it's not all about other people, it's also about technology and really streamlining and being consistent in your own work. So we do have a few minutes for questions anyway. I did try to go through so we'd at least be able to see. So Deanne, do we have anything that popped up? Otherwise, you can contact me later if you do have questions.
Let me see. I think since we're such a small group, why don't we just do open Q&A? And if anybody has a question, they can just unmute themselves and ask.
I've got a quick question,
Yeah.
Joshua, what's your sense on, I know you've talked, not only, but about residential. How would you see, what's the intersection of residential and commercial, if you don't mind? I know a lot of us here are residential, but there's a few commercial folks too. Would you see any differences there?
In concept, I don't see. First of all, we do have the same standards, right? And I'm a USPAP instructor. So I'm a USPAP geek. A lot of people who work with me, they know. So everything that you're considering in changing your office, you always sort of want to screen it for, hey, is this acceptable? Am I doing things right? Whether it's methodology or whether it's the standards themselves. Commercial and residential, we have the same standards. I think if I had to generalize, I think commercial appraisers have historically been better at building a team than residential appraisers. I think there's a lot of commercial appraisers out there who have what they call an analyst, and they're just pulling the numbers, crunching it the way the appraiser needs it into standard, here's your 12 charts you wanted about this data, and now I can pull all I need out of it. I know that from commercial in town here in Grand Junction. Also, there's a client I had, she was a commercial appraiser and she was trying to build the residential side of her firm, but she was sharing with what she did on her side. And she had the very sort of, I'm the high level analyst, the appraiser, and I'm gonna have all these people working around me, feeding me the information that I can verify. And then it's in the format and it is the content that I need. So I think there's really no difference other than we're ending up with a different report. It's different properties. It looks different, but it's the same components that make it up. Anyone else? It's 4:30 here. It must be 3:30 there. 3:30 on a Friday. We can't expect a lot from participants. I've learned that from teaching. The Friday afternoon classes are usually like, oh, how did this happen? Why are any of us here, right? Any other questions?
Josh, I had a question, just a real quick one. So you said you have an assistant out of Belize, correct?
I do, yes.
How did you find an assistant in Belize?
Yeah, so there's a variety of websites that you can go to online where there are freelancers around the world. And so I was looking for someone in, plus or minus 1, maybe 2 hours. And I didn't think I'd be looking in Central or South America. I just happened to stumble on her at Fiverr.com. And it's FIV, like Victor, ERR.com.
Okay.
And you can go in there and there's all sorts of freelancers and you just describe. And I remember when she replied back, she said, this sounds really intriguing because, I don't do much appraisal work. I do all this sort of varied, and I was kind of describing what I need. And so you can describe exactly what you need from the person, what kind of skill set you want, and then you Actually, Fiverr has a video, app, but you could Skype or Zoom with them or whatever. And but there's others too. If you're looking for very, very cheap labor, there's certain sites for Filipino workers. I don't know if that's the website. I don't care, the nationality of people, but I think that's what it's called in terms of the website. And that, the pricing is different, standards of living are different, everything all over the world. So it's kind of this global economy. So you see, what skills do I need? And the assistant I found, her name is Amanda, and she is a former appraiser who now does a lot of volunteer work. And in other times, she also does freelance work. So I was able to kind of say, okay, well, how many hours a week do I need? And it just fit in for both of us. So it's excellent.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. I'll take a look.
Yeah, take a look if you're interested. There's a lot of people out there looking for the work. So.
Cool.
Okay. Well, it sounds pretty silent. I'm pretty much done with work today. It's 4:30 here. So you guys still have another hour at least to work, right?
Yeah, and your info's up on the screen, Josh. So if people have questions, they can feel free to reach out to you. And if residential appraiser has any questions about taking on assistants or putting systems into place in their work, they're also free to contact me. I'm happy to chat with anybody about that. It's been, it's not hyperbole to say it's been life-changing. And
oh, thank you.
Yeah, and you were a part of that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, yeah, Rob, Rob came to me. I mean, the life-changing came from him. I just sort of helped facilitate, let's look at these things. But Rob had an kind of a vision, right? I'd say like, this is kind of where I want to be. And that's really what, it was this sort of long conversation. And we kind of moved in that direction. That's really what it is. But
Yeah.
so, and if you have questions about any complaints, I would hate for, that someone is dealing with it. But if you are going through a complaint or an investigation or something, and you just need some honest feedback on your work, reach out. Every so often, I've had people who it's sort of long-term, and then other times it's just very like, I just need honest, I need you to tell me honestly what you think of this. My first reaction to any complaint, I'll just do this since I've got the floor, and I think it's a good public service announcement, is to contact your E&O and your attorney. Don't, the first email should not be to someone like me, it needs to be to your E&O and your attorney. Don't go it alone. Don't think you can do it alone. But if you do need an honest sort of USPAP approach or sort of reaction to your report, don't hesitate to reach out, because I know it can be a very difficult situation. So, and that can be really quick and easy. So.
Thanks again, Josh. Again, I really appreciate you being here. And Peter, wherever you are in NorCal, thank you very much. Virtual fist bumps and high fives to everyone. And that concludes our fall conference. I really want to thank our sponsors. Well, first, I want to thank Mitch and Scott for all of their efforts. And I know I'm going to forget somebody, so if I forget who you were, thank you. But it's thankless work, and and this year has been so strange and so weird, and hours and hours and hours of great work completely in the round file. So I just appreciate everyone's efforts. It's so selfless and so appreciated. And I would like to thank our sponsors. Platinum sponsor this year was CBRE, silver sponsor, LIA administrators, bronze level sponsorship from McKee Appraisal and Rock and Associates. Friends of the conference were Matt Bacon, Scott Beethan, Todd Henderson, Mel Morgan, Mitch Olson, Renee Schaefer, Stan Sedor, our president. And if we were in the same room, we would give you a round of applause and buy you a cocktail. Thank you so much for joining us. And there's going to be there'll be a webinar that was announced just today on the call in November, Extreme Appraising, I think. Look for an announcement on that. And then also on January 22nd, we're going to have a webinar from Matthew Gardner. More information will be coming in your emails. Thank you very much for joining us today and for being a part of our fall conference.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great
Great
week.
weekend.